Hello, you beautiful degenerates, and welcome to Links and Locks, the Action Network's golf betting podcast presented by Bet365. This is your 2024 John Deere Classic Tournament Betting Preview alongside Spencer Aguiar, whom you can find on Twitter or X at TOF Sports, and Nick Bretwish, whom you can find on X at StixPicks. I'm Roberto Arguello. Following the Rocket Mortgage Classic, where I wasn't betting. You guys had a couple of second place finishes again. I think that's like 5 straight weeks for Nick, and I combined 9 out of 10 over for both Nick and Spencer over the last 10 weeks. Ridiculous run. We're really close. Let's see if we can get across the finish line this week in the Quad Cities. We're in Nick's area of the country. So, Nick, I'll sling it to you first. What is your best bet for the John Deere Classic?
Going with the best mustache in golf. You've been talking about him for a couple of weeks. I think this is a great course fit for him, and it's my favorite market, which we went back to last week, and it did work out with Andrew Novak. Going Chandler Phillips, top 40, where ties pay in full at plus 130.
All right, Chandler Phillips going with the Aggie in the Midwest. Spencer, who you got for your best bet this week?
I don't necessarily love this matchup board. Like when we get into the outright stats, and you discussed it, Roberto, it's been very close calls for Nick and I over and over again. I think that this might be the week that one of us get across the finish line in the outright. So stay tuned for that. But I'll give my best bet as David Skins minus 105 over Joseph Bramlett.
All right, David Skins was absolutely striping the ball with his irons last week. So you're fading Joseph Bramlett with him. For my best bet, I'm going to jump into the top 40 market just like Nick, and I'm going to do it with last year's Korn Ferry Tour Player of the Year, Ben Coles. I've got him for top 40 at plus 140. Before we get into my top 40 bet, Nick, why are you jumping on Chandler Phillips for the top 40?
Overall, he graded as a top 25 player for me on this course in terms of safety. I really like the short iron play, his ability to hit fairways, and honestly, just his ability to overall score when he is ball striking. So his strokes gained approach at the RBC was very, very poor. I think one of the worst rounds he's had all season long, dating back to the Farmers Insurance, where again, that course is a lot more longer irons for a guy like Chandler Phillips, where this course is not very long. Set yourself up in the fairway. It's going to have a lot of rain currently right now and tonight. And so I do assume that that rough will kind of bake out a little bit tomorrow and get pretty long because it is supposed to be like mid to upper 80s tomorrow and just plentiful sunshine. So that rough's probably going to be growing. I really emphasize fairway hitting this week and guys with those mid to short irons, and that's where Chandler Phillips exceeds. Also, like a short game, I don't think it's fantastic, but it's good enough to get around here. I don't think these greens are very tricky. There's not a ton of crazy runoffs or anything. Some bunkers that I've played the course a couple times. Bunkers aren't very penal or anything like that. I think that this course just demands accuracy off the tee. Distance would help too on some of those par fives, but a guy like Chandler Phillips is plenty safe with that flat stick there, which these greens are pretty pure. To get inside the top 40, I had this price closer to even money. So if I can get 30 points of value and the ties in full, which again, I think we equate that to about 15 extra points. So give or take, 40 to 45 points of value in my model for Chandler Phillips inside the top 40.
All right, we've cashed for Chandler Phillips as our best bet back at the Valspar earlier this season. Let's see if we can get it here at the John Deere Classic. Spencer, why are you fading my Stanford Cardinal, Joseph Bramlett, this week?
It pretty much just came down to trying to take on a player that graded as the worst value in my sheet this week. If you look at what Bramlett's done here, 4 career attempts at this course, 4 missed cuts. Sometimes you get these outcomes and everything that transpires with it where sometimes the results don't match the metrics, but the fact that the results are matching what my model is projecting on him, like even when, and I'll talk about it with David Skins in a second, there are different ways that I run my model, and I will run every single player with a 0% course weight attached to them just to see if anything changes. And when I ran a 0% weight for course history, which is something that should technically help Bramlett in my sheet, it still saw him grade 99th for expected strokes gained at TPC Deere Run. There are going to be some semi-intriguing data points for him with the driver just because of his distance. But when you get the fact that he also graded 118th in his career at TPC tracks and 132nd when combining strokes gained total at both easy to medium strength scoring courses and then short to medium courses, that delivered a profile that I was trying to figure out a way to take on this week. There's only one route of going about that. That's David Skins. He has failed to make the cut here himself in his one try, but as I just talked about, one of the things I like to do for players, and this is even just beyond the answer I'm giving, like if you have 0 appearances or 1 appearances, or 1 appearance, sorry, with that has ended up being a miscut there, I like to weigh their metrics like without that course history. So anyone who lands in the top 50 range there will then get added back in a varying degree of course history weight back into their total. No, that's kind of a convoluted weight that I just explained that there, but Skins ended up grading top 50 for me when you remove that miscut and you don't add in the weighted course history. Even if I gave him the complete detriment of missing out on the weekend, he still landed 39th overall. That jumped up to 32nd when I gave him more of that middle ground course history weight that I wanted to give. So I don't necessarily fully trust Skins here. Like those are all very intriguing answers for him. But as I always say for these matchups, I'm trying to find an opponent to take on. And the market seems to be much higher on Bramlett than I am this week. Like he was outside of the top 100 in every iteration of how I ran my model.
Spencer, Skins' irons are hot. He led the field last week at the Rocket Mortgage Classic in approach play. So hopefully he keeps that strong play going for you. And even if Bramlett pops, maybe Skins has the goods to beat him. Skins a great story. I think he is 42 years old. 2 years ago, made it on the PGA Tour as a rookie at 40. Didn't do anything. I don't think he had a top 25. He did not have a top 25 finish. But in his last 6 starts, he's got 4 top 21 finishes. So definitely playing some of the best golf of his career right now. So I like the Skins play. And if I can find that one, I think I'm going to tail you on it. But going to my best bet, I'm backing Ben Coles for the top 40 market. I'm also going to bet him for top 20 at plus 375 and outright at 110 to 1. But I like the top 40 bet because it's the safest one. And at plus 140, I'd bet this one down to even money. And it's because he last year was the Korn Ferry Tour Player of the Year. Really got off to a slow start this season. In his first 11 PGA Tour starts this year, only 1 top 30 finish, which came in Puerto Rico, which is an opposite field event. Some people wouldn't count it. I'll give it to him. In his 7 starts since then, he's got 4 top 30 finishes, and he's gained strokes putting in 5 of 6 tracked events. Also, he's a great fit for this week. Excels in driving accuracy, approach play, and putting, especially more so with his shorter irons since he's not a long guy. His driving accuracy has been consistent, but his approach play and putting are both surging after a slow start earlier this season. Because of all that momentum with both the irons and the putter, I think it's coming together at the perfect time. We saw him at another easy golf course at TPC Craig Ranch have a chance to win before the old Mongolian reversal on the final hole where Pendrith makes birdie, he makes bogey, Pendrith wins outright. I think Coles is in a great spot to make the cut, get a top 40, potentially get a top 20. And if he finds himself in contention, I think that experience in Dallas will help him out this week. So I'm going with the top 40 as my best bet at plus 140 for the Virginia Cavalier. Fellas, let's get into our course preview before we do our outright cards and we go through the rest of our bets for the week. Spencer, I'll sling it to you. How are you modeling TPC Deere Run this week?
I think anytime that you get what is deemed to be a shorter course that features wide open fairways and larger than average greens, the data is always going to start to point you in that direction of a pitch and putt contest. I don't know if it's necessarily as simple as that this week, since there are additional metrics and nuance factors that we should be considering when building a model. But if you're viewing TPC Deere Run as anything more than a birdie fest, you're probably doing something wrong at its core inside of your metrics. So this venue was built in 1999 by D.A. Weibring on a former Arabian horse farm. Weibring used the natural rolling landscape of the land to create a venue that's going to stretch alongside the picturesque wooded ravines of the area's famous Rock River. One of the things we discuss almost every week on this show when talking about TPC properties is how these tracks are consistent in their builds. We always see the layouts mimic something along the lines of beautiful made-for-television architecture. It's frequently going to accentuate birdie fest scoring conditions. The tour does seem to believe that's better coverage on television. That's probably a discussion for a different day that we could have, but one of the unique ways I built my model this week past the common layout answers those are going to be very easy to extrapolate, was by adding in the reprojected weighted proximity returns for this course, and then adding that to the make percentage totals on putts that we have on record throughout the event's history. To me, deviating a little in that area, while then you add in the common viewpoints, historical TPC scoring, easy scoring at its most basic level. I think you can run similar architecture trends of where tracks mimic other venues. That was the most simplistic way for me to try to get unique, but do so in a fashion that didn't necessarily yield the exact blueprint as everyone else that was going to be looking at the data. I did this last year. I had Sepp Straka at this tournament, and one of the reasons that it pushed me to Straka is I just tried to figure out essentially that answer of the weighted proximity and the make percentages is just, and I've talked about it a little bit on this show in the past, is who's going to create the most opportunities? And then based off of those opportunities that are getting created, what percentage of the time are the players in this field actually producing a birdie when they get into that spot? So you add all of that together. That's how I ran my model to kind of try to look at this still from a putting perspective, but maybe not just do it in the sense of these are the best putters. These are the guys that are going to play well. There's a lot more that goes into this venue than that. And when you can give yourself opportunities, you might not be making every single one of them. And there's a lot of names that we're going to talk about on my outright card that really ended up popping for me in that fashion that maybe didn't have the prerequisites I was looking for with the putter. But it's an interesting tournament because opportunities for me ended up being the most important, I guess, weight that I attached to my sheet. Because I think if you're giving yourself opportunities, you're giving yourself a better chance to work yourself up the leaderboard.
Nick, anything else in your model that you weighed that you'd like to add?
No, I think you nailed it on the head, and kind of my stress on hitting fairways and those close, anywhere from 75, 150, those wedge shots to short iron, I think is pretty much everything I'm looking for this week.
I'll also add that this week we are on bent grass again. Last week it was a bent grass POA mix, just like the week before at the Travelers Championship. And these greens this week are going to be significantly more pure than last week, where I thought it was a lot tougher to roll to hole putts. So I am giving as much weight to putting as I do all season long. I normally weigh it a little bit less than most people do, but I think that will be a key factor this week because some people are going to go absolutely nuclear on the greens. And just last year, someone like JT Poston lost strokes on approach play and still got into the top 10 because you can get lightning hot on these greens. So I am very intrigued to see how that ends up here at TPC Deere Run. Gentlemen, let's get into our outright cards. Nick, I'll sling it to you. Who you got to win the tournament this week at the John Deere Classic?
Speaking of weighing putting extremely heavy, somehow I got back to Keith Mitchell in the outright market. 34-1 just seemed like a little bit of a number grab for me. I had him in like the 28 to 30 range. Rio Hitsatsune at 65-1, Maverick McNeely 28-1. So I guess we checked that box of the putting. I hate that ticket, but I do think that his game's in a really good place. I know his approach play and overall ball striking wasn't great last week, but if it is there, everything else in his game, hitting fairway, seems to be something he's doing at a elite clip right now. Bo Hostler 60-1. I would love to get your guys' takes on him. Seamus Power 55 and JT Poston 36. So I was right there at right about a unit at risk. I think I went over my threshold this week, but with 5 second place finishes in a row, I figured I had a extra golfer in there, so I'll do it. But also want to get your guys' take on Jordan Spieth.
I don't know how you can bet him at the price that he's at. Like,
Right.
To me, he's more of a DFS consideration. I think his ownership's going to be very low. And I actually wrote this in an article yesterday. When you have a player and when he's the number one price player on a DFS board, it changes the game a little bit. But when you have a player that nobody's going to want to play, that's still a top 30 expected win equity candidate for you. And he can push a little bit higher than that, depending on exactly how you run your data. And I would assume he's probably higher on your model, Nick, than mine. That doesn't mean that he's necessarily a name that's so far down on mine, but those are very intriguing GPP sort of options to where everybody's off of Spieth for all the obvious reasons. And he might very well do exactly what he's been doing. But if you look at some of the ball striking returns, Spieth has actually been performing much more admirably than the results have indicated. And I came on and we had this discussion like leading into the Open Championship of who's somebody out there that might be trending, and the metrics and the results don't necessarily show it when you just look at where they're finishing. Spieth was one of those names that we talked about. As I said, I can't necessarily get there on the outright price that we're getting because it's not necessarily baking anything in. And he opened as the favorite in a lot of these spots. It's been pushed up, and it's a really funny thing that happened. It's like Cantlay removed himself from the field and everybody dropped in price, and Spieth took the opposite approach of getting drifted up with his number in a lot of these shops. So, it is what it is at this point. I'm not going to get there in the outright market, but I will say, Nick, I don't have an outright ticket on Beau Hossler. He's probably the closest name that I had on my sheet that I wanted to get to this week. The upside metrics for him is exactly what I'm looking for when trying to punch some of these outright tickets. We talked a little bit before the show started. Hitsatsune, Højgaard, which was the big person that I was on a bunch last week, Hossler. Those were the three biggest underachievers that I could find in my model when you look at their ball striking and what their actual performance ended up being. Roberto already talked about this. You get a change in the green complex this week, and you're going to be able to find players that might be able to find upside. I don't know if Rio's going to necessarily do that because he has negative trajectory in my model for putting on bent grass. I ended up punching the ticket because the ball striking looks so good myself, and I'll talk about that a little bit deeper in a second. But there are a lot of names, and we know Hossler to be a good putter, but he gets even better in my model on bent grass. I think the market is a little bit too low on him because of the results that ended up being not as high end as they should have been for the way that he performed entering the final round. And this is like the biggest takeaway I want everybody to hear. I always talk about reprojecting a leaderboard and trying to figure out taking the actual ball striking and the 2-year baseline with the short game statistics. Beau Hossler was running away with that in my model entering the final round, and he was outside of the top 20 on the leaderboard. So for a player that should have been leading that golf tournament and just didn't quite get what he usually does with his putter, and he has positive upside in my model this week, I think he's a really prime candidate to bounce back in a big way. And if, Nick, we've talked about this, whether it's from the one and done or even from this discussion, like there was a Tom Kim discussion a couple weeks ago on it. I don't think you were on the show, but it's that player that doesn't end up making my card that always seems to come in second place in a lot of these contests. I know you need the victory. Don't want to jinx another second place for us here, but I like that Hossler play.
I think that Keith Mitchell and Beau Hossler, if you could put them together into one golfer, they would be the best golfer in this field. You can't. I don't trust Beau Hossler's ball striking. I know that he gained 4 straight rounds last week, and Spencer, you just noted how he was an underachiever. Keith Mitchell was the only person who gained more strokes on approach per round than David Skins last week, but he only played 2 rounds because he missed the cut. It's frustrating that Keith Mitchell's been on such a great ball striking run this year, but the putter has been ice cold. Perhaps a change of scenery will help him, but it's not like he hasn't been on bent grass greens as recently as a few weeks ago. So if you want to bet Keith Mitchell, shoot for the moon, top 5, top 10, outright winner. I like that play.
Yeah.
Spencer, who you got on your outright card?
Just to double down really quickly, I guess, on the Keith Mitchell discussion that we've had, and it'll push me into my place here. So like I said, I have putting in my model this week. It's not I didn't weigh this without, I know I talked about trying to get unique and different, but there's a lot of strokes gained putting on bent grass. I tried to look at similar green complexes. When you look at the soft to medium greens we're going to get, I think they're going to be average to fast. I kind of rolled all of that into one answer. Some of those for Keith Mitchell go in the wrong direction, but I guess for me, and I don't want to get caught on this Keith Mitchell train because I feel like he's become the Alex Noren of what Alex Noren was for us 2 years ago. I'm sure in 2 years from now, Keith Mitchell's going to be top 10ing every single tournament. We're finally going to get what a fair result was for him. But Mitchell was one of the most significant climbers in my model when you take strokes gained putting on bent grass and the improvement that they got there versus their baseline at any other course. So of realistic players for me that could win this tournament, Dunlap was a big climber. Daniel Berger was a big climber. I'll talk about him in a second. Mitchell was one of the big climbers. For me, the biggest climber that I had in expected putting, and this is why I started my card here, was at Aaron Rai at 22 to 1. That has since fallen into that 18 to 20 to 1 range at most shops. I think Rye's been the most consistent player in this field over the past 2.5 months. 6 consecutive top 40 finishes dating back to the Byron Nelson. You add all of that to a statistical profile that placed him inside the top 10 of this field for a tournament leading 5 of 6 categories that I ran this week. That's going to include expected ball striking for TPC Deere Run. That's a very important one. Weighted strokes gained total. That always carries my biggest weight of the week. And then projected scoring. You start to get a golfer who landed as my top win equity choice on the board. I know that this number that I'm about to give is going to sound borderline outrageous. This is very aggressive for a player who hasn't won on tour, but I think it's hard to ignore the recent surging form for him. You get a weaker event here. I had 15.5 to 1 as the proper going rate for him. And the thing with that price to the next player I'm about to talk about now, like if we're talking about actual value, I would say this next play is the best value that I have on the board. I got JT Poston, or at least I recommended him at 33 to 1. I kind of alluded to the fact that I think there's a pretty good chance, just with how weak the market opened with him, that he was going to drift up the board. I know that Nick said he got 36 to 1. I believe there's some 35 to 1 still in the market.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's probably the best pure win equity value that you can find of any of these names. I talked a lot about this with Minwoo Lee last week. One of the things I'm trying to project with my model is pure upside. That's going to outweigh any of the safer returns that you're going to get of the other markets. It's impossible to run a model, at least for me, and this not show how Poston's going to have a wider ceiling, a much lower floor than a lot of these names. But I want to shoot for that upside when I'm trying to win a golf tournament. He was first place for me in weighted strokes gained total. I just talked about how that's always the grade for me that carries the most weight. That's 30% of my statistical weight that I have just on that one category there. You weigh that with every one of these other categories. There's 2 additional top 10s. A lot of those land inside the top 5. I think that one of the things people do, and I always try to talk about this on the show, is we don't shoot for enough upside when actually trying to punch these tickets. It's always players that they have really safe floors, but their ceiling might not be as high. Poston's the exact opposite of that. Boom or bust sort of play, but at the price, one of the best win equity candidates I had. I'm going to double down on Nick's play. Rio hit Satsune. I got him at 66 to 1. He was my favorite target in 2024 when we entered this year. Haven't necessarily gotten those pristine high-end results. Lack of a top 10 finish throughout this entire year, but I feel like that outlook is flawed when you consider his last handful of starts. I just want to note 2 points here. I'll keep this very short because Nick already did a good job talking about him. Look at what he's averaged tee to green just over the last 5 tournaments, and then go to the last 2 tournaments. Shrink the sample size even from there. So over the last 5, plus 0.274 strokes gained tee to green. You look at the last 2, plus 5.25 tee to green. Those 2 finishes didn't yield better than a 31st place finish because of the poor putting. There's some of that feature that's going to come into play this week. I talked about how he was a negative mover in my model, but there's 2 sorts and 2 types of golfers here. There's the golfer who just loses with his flat stick over and over again. And there's the golfer who loses really big, but when he gains really big. And that's more of the profile I want to take on in a lot of these positions, because if the ball striking can hit and the putter can actually produce, that's how you get a victory. It doesn't mean that the putter is going to necessarily coincide with it, but he's gained over 4 shots in 2 of his past 6 starts. He's lost over 2.5 shots in an additional 5 of 12 tournaments. So 7 of the last 12 tournaments he's played, he's either gained over 4 or lost over 2.5. I kind of expect the same outcome to come into play this week, but I would rather shoot for the upside there at that 66 to 1 price. Took Doug Gim at 80 to 1. Lack of upside, similar answer to Rio. It's just the actual statistical profile for me. And these are things I'll write about. I'll write it in the Action Network article that comes out on Wednesday. We'll talk about why my model liked Gim as much as it did, but it's just, I'm much higher on him than consensus seems to be every single week. And I know the putter has remained really bad over the course of the last couple months, but I do think his ball striking at some moment is going to put it together. And when he puts it together, I expect him to provide a high-end finish, even if he hasn't necessarily done that so far this season. And then I closed out my card with Daniel Berger at 80 to 1. I gave this answer like, if you look at my players this week, outside of JT Poston, there's a very consistent trend inside my model for these are mostly poor putters that have the ability to spike with that portion of their game. Berger's going to give me that. He was a top 20 player for me in a lot of iterations of how I built this. There were some negative marks that ended up pushing him in the opposite direction when we look at expected birdie rates and things of that nature. But the thing I liked about him most is if you just compare him at any generic course, so he's 114th in birdie or better percentage at a random course. When you look at easy scoring conditions and expected strokes gained at just easy scoring tracks, he jumped up to number 3 for me in my model. So Berger is one of these, you give him a course that's short to medium in length. You give him a course that generates easier birdie looks. He always generates a higher ceiling in those potential outcomes. So I'm going to take him at 80-1. I'm going to hope that the putter turns around. It might be broken. I know Nick seems to think that it might be broken. He very well may be correct with that, but I like the number at 80-1. It was too enticing for me to pass up.
Guys, I got a couple notes. Ryo Hisatsune, your boy, he has one win on the DP World Tour. Do you guys know where that came?
Yes. I cannot recall off the top of my head right now, though. Nick, do you know?
From cheating, France.
Yes. He won at the French Open, Le Golf National, which is the host site of this year's Olympics. Unfortunately, he was edged out just barely in the official world golf rankings by another golfer. So he did not qualify for the Olympics. So I'm sad about that. I wish we could see him there.
Looks like my boy finished T2 that week. Sorry to cut you off, but Jordan Smith, get ready for to talk about him at the Scottish Open
next week. I'm excited for that. Also wanted to note that last year at the John Deere Classic, Spencer, you talked about the upside with putting, and I will echo the sentiments of you need guys who have upside throughout the bag, just in general, or who can put the pieces together to potentially get to a certain strokes gain number for the week. And that's how you should be looking at it, not just like who's played and gotten a couple top 20s in a row. That's not how you got to bet outrights. Anyways, last year, Poston was second in the field in strokes gain putting. Do you guys know who was first in strokes gain putting last year at this event?
I could cheat. If I had to guess,
I will not cheat, but
I'm going to guess Andrew Putnam.
Good guess. It was Kevin Yu, best putting week of his life.
The only putting week of his life.
Maybe the only putting week of his life. He was closer to 80 to 100-1 last year, if I recall. I bet him. And this year, he's 40-1. So I haven't bet him. I don't know that I expect that to repeat, but I just thought that was really interesting and something worth noting. You got to have some kind of upside. So it can happen. It might not be likely, but it can happen. I don't have Kevin Yu on my card this week. As always, am dying to put him on my card. We had some bonus action last week on the main feed or on our feature groups feed. We moved to the 15th hole where Kevin Yu had a 5-foot birdie putt, and of course he missed it. So that was the one time I got to see Kevin Yu last week. On my card this week, it's pretty short. I have strong putters. I have room for more. So I am open to adding some more, maybe an in-pod play. I already noted Ben Coles at 110-1. I won't elaborate on that. I have a Lee Hodges 100-1 ticket. He's a strong putter and iron player without any huge weaknesses. So I bet him in the top 40 market. I like that a little bit more. But at 100-1, this is more of a number grab. I thought he should have been closer to the 80 to 70-1 range. His iron play had been hot before last week's Rocket Mortgage, where he gained an approach on 5 straight, including at the PGA Championship, where he was second in the entire field in approach play. So I like the upside there, even though that profiles is more of a mid-iron golf course. And he gained over a stroke per round on approach in 3 of his last 5 events. So he can get to a certain level with his irons that I think is really valuable in this field. And the putter was hot during a pure bent grass stretch earlier this season, where he gained for 4 straight weeks, including at the PGA Championship. The POA mix the last couple of weeks, he was below average, but I'm willing to buy back on him in a pure bent grass surface this week. And he's more accurate than long off the tee. So I think he fits the mold of somebody who can just get it on the green, give himself opportunities. And then if his putter gets hot, he can win. So I like that at 100-1. I thought he had more upside than a lot of his other peers in that price range. I also bet Davis Thompson at 30-1. I love Davis Thompson. Would have bet him last week if I was able to bet. I was between Pendrith and Davis Thompson in one and done. And in pure Spencer fashion, I chose wrong. So I am maybe being a little bit reactionary here. I'm probably going to play him for one and done. I'm not completely sold on that, but I love Davis Thompson. He's trending in the right direction. Made his first cut at a major championship a couple weeks ago at the U.S. Open, which was a tie for ninth. I'm very excited about this guy's game. I don't want to miss it, and he might end up being the best golfer in this field when we look back a couple of years from now. I also think that there's a lot of intrigue around some other golfers in this field. Neil Shipley, 100-1, very intriguing. I think he's actually 110-1. He plays really aggressively. He had some fun quotes after some of the rounds last week where he said, yeah, my strategy hasn't changed. I'm just going to bomb driver everywhere and try to go for birdies everywhere. I don't know that that's the best strategy this week where there is a missed penalty or a missed fairway penalty, but I'm intrigued by his upside. Luke Clanton also intrigues me. Don't have him on the card for outrights. He could be the best golfer in this field next year.
How about that, though? We mentioned him last week, just like saying, are the books scared of him and just don't want any risk? And I think that was definitely a sharp, like, obviously it was a great number now in terms of implied probabilities, but I feel like they just priced him out of the market because they just wanted to see what he could do, and obviously had great knowledge that he is a fantastic ball strike, and that dude rips it off the driver.
So yeah, we got to call a few of his shots last week, and he was consistently hanging around 182, 83 ball speed, which is roughly 10th. And he's a child. He's like 20 years old. I've actually got a Luke Clanton play, so I'll transition this into the rest of our cards. I noted Lee Hodges. I've got him for top 40 plus 125. I've also got Luke Clanton for top 40 plus 105. Let's take a look at his results so far this season. He's played in 2 professional events. He had a putt to make birdie on the 72nd hole at the US Open, which would have tied him for 32nd, I believe. He ended up 3-putting, tied for 41st. He also, last week, tied for 10th. And then he has made 10 starts in college this year. 9 of those 10 were tied for 11th or better. So this guy's floor is pretty darn high. I'm not going to say that T11 on a college event would be a top 40 on the PGA Tour, but it just that he is consistently playing decent golf. And oh, by the way, during that 10 tournament stretch, his last 6 starts since March 10th in college were a tie for second, a tie for fifth, a fifth, solo fifth, a win, and a win. So 3 wins in his last 6 college starts. He's only a rising junior at Florida State. He's got a ton of upside. I wish I could buy stock on him. Maybe we should buy a trading card on him right now and see if we can get in before everybody is in on him. But he's got so much upside. I don't think this is the best course fit because he's not going to be able to bomb driver everywhere and really get a payoff for that length advantage on this golf course. But at top 40 plus 105, I'll sprinkle it a little bit. I'm not going to get too invested on it. But Spencer, I was looking at your sheet and he was basically right there at the top.
Yeah, I think that this is not we always talk on this show about not being reactionary to a lot of these situations. And I don't have a ton of data on him, but for him to be inside of the top 10 of my model after just a couple of events worth of data, this is a very intriguing answer. And I think you mentioned it best, Roberto. Like we can talk about this being a watered down field, and at its core, it probably is, but there are some young, intriguing, super high-end potential golfers. Him being one, Davis Thompson. There's 5 or 6 names that we could really go through here that in a year or two might be legitimate top 20 players in the world. So I don't think this tournament is necessarily as bad at its ground level. And I've talked about this before, that trying to buy trading cards of players, like that was the game that I played with Giannis with the NBA stuff. Just don't be premature with it like I was and sell it before the maximum boom ends up taking place and costing yourself, I want to say hundreds of thousands, but I probably cost myself millions at the end of the day. Like I had some of the super high end stuff and I made a ton from it, but some of those booms that like the card market experience post COVID, when all of that was coming in and that market boomed, that was painful watching that market go up and up and up.
I only have 3 plays on my outright card. I'm very intrigued by Rye. I'm very intrigued by Poston. Bo Hostler has me itching a little bit. I think there's some upside there. I just don't trust the iron play. I am very much considering those guys. I noted that Davis Thompson is my one and done play right now. I might go crazy and put Clanton in there. I don't even know if we can. Just because I don't know. Anyways, Nick, you put me way in the rearview mirror. You got 600,000 last week, roughly, with I believe Mimu Lee. So you are
What a shocker, Roberto. Like I said on the show, the one player that I don't have available that I want to use, it's the most fireproof strategy that like you can't lose with it. And I get stuck. I wanted to play Minwoo. I'm just trying to make cuts. It's all I'm trying to do. Just take down the made cut strategy and win whatever my 5% ends up being from it and just call it a day. I take Tom Kim just trying to play it safe, and there's a miscut. So this just has not gone well. I don't know, with this being a weaker tournament, I don't know that I necessarily have somebody that I've already used that I would like to use, but if I do figure out what that name is, Roberto, I'll be, or Nick, I guess, maybe we'll rotate who gets it every single week. I'll be sure to just text you guys and you guys can figure out which way you want to go with it.
unbelievable.
I love it. The curse of Spencer lives on.
Nick, who you got for one and done this week?
Simple answer, JT Poston. Had I had others available, I would play Sanjay M here. As much as I like, because the elevated events are done, right? The elevated purses.
Yeah. Kind of. The first 2 weeks of the playoffs will be the same as prior elevated events. So we basically have 3 left with the open.
I think on paper, yeah, he's probably the most like well-rounded, high upside, like highest win equity in my model. It actually was not Jordan Spieth when Spencer brought that up earlier. I'm sure a lot of people used him already. Going down the rankings here, Davis Thompson would probably be another guy I'd seriously consider, but I'm going to go with JT Poston here. Locked and loaded.
Spencer, who you got for one and done?
I'm trying to bring it up right now, and I've apparently locked myself out of my account, or I've been locked out of the account, so I don't even know who I have available.
Tell me who you want, and I can try to let you know if you have them available. I have it here.
Roberto didn't tell you about the cut at June. Only the top 13 in the field make the cut after June, so 14th and 15th are out. Sorry, man.
I would take Aaron Rye. I mean, there's no way I've taken Aaron Rye, correct?
Correct.
I'll take.
Or no. Sorry. Lied. Oh, well, that means Nick, we have to play Aaron Rye because Spencer took him at the Valspar, and that was one of Spencer's few miscuts. So
I don't understand.
You played Aaron Rye already,
but that's the thing. Like, I played Minwoo Lee, like when nobody had played Minwoo Lee. How have I played Aaron Rye? I don't understand what has happened in this contest.
Aaron Rye is winning. You were playing Aaron Rye before he was cool.
Aaron Rye is winning this golf tournament based off of that. I mean, I guess Poston would be my second choice, but that doesn't help me any. I don't know. I might just not submit a pick and just say I was hacked and try to get my money back.
You got Davis Thompson available?
Maybe Davis Thompson would be the best play then based off of what
He does have Davis Thompson available. You do.
Him or Straka. I think Straka is going to be popular, but
you could play KH Lee. You know, it's TPC course, and he's been broken, but it can't be worse than most of your picks this year.
Well, I mean, the thing is they're just made cuts. I come in 43rd place every single week, and then when I actually want to use the player in.
Yeah, if we could figure out who Spencer's betting or picking for one and done, if we could bet that person to finish exactly 28th, we'd be making a killing.
It's the top 40 market. That's just, there you go.
All right, guys. What else do you have on your cards? I'll sling it to you, Nick. Any other plays besides your top 40 and the outrights?
Yeah. Bet365, our good partners over there, laid a good price on Rio top 20 at 3-1. Mentioned Chandler Phillips as my best bet. Kind of riding recent form and a guy that I think does fit this course in these lower, I don't want to say lower skill, but these like the lower profile tournaments. Patton Kazire top 20. I found a number that was way off market. I have this at plus like 380, but there is a shop out there in the legal market that is plus 450. And I believe that is it. So yeah, Rio top 20, Patton Kazire top 20, and Chandler Phillips top 40. But minimal risk on Patton Kazire.
Okay, the Phillips one was the one was your best bet.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I wasn't sure if there was another top 20.
Yep, nope. Just Chandler inside top 40, and then Rio and Pat and Kazai are top 20.
Awesome. Spencer, any other bets on your card this week?
I think the three that Nick just said are three of the best values that I have in this space. That's including the Chandler Phillips pick that he mentioned at the beginning of the show. Patton Kazire for me was a top 20 overall grader. Better safety ratings even than that. The upside left a little bit to be desired, but I think a top 20 bet at that number that Nick just talked about is a very interesting play there. The only other ticket for me, and it's kind of under the same umbrella of this conversation that we've had of trying to find these guys that have been producing recently that are grading well in our models. Justin Lauer, top 40 plus 150. I like that ticket. Like when I write my Action Network best bets article that's going to come out today with all of us on it, the head-to-head matchup that I talked about came from a book that I'm not going to be able to use for that. I'm assuming at this moment, Justin Lauer for a top 40 will probably be my favorite play. He just consistently continues to grade inside of the top 20 of my model pretty much week in and week out. And whether it's him or Nick hit it last week with Andrew Novak, I feel like it's those players that the market has just been really slow. Jacob Bridgman, like it's starting to fit that mold too. Maybe Chandler Phillips would be the other. It's just very consistently these players are producing and they're not necessarily getting the move inside the market. And we see this happen every once in a while. It was the Eric Cole syndrome that happened over and over again last year. It was a much higher end finishes that Cole was providing, but regardless of whatever Cole did in last season, he never really moved in the market. And I feel like Lauer and Bridgman and Phillips and Novak, no matter what they're doing, they just continue to stay at the same exact price. And at some point, you have to acknowledge that the number is just off.
Yeah, these are guys who may not be the ones we want to target in the outright market, at least unless we get a big fat number next to their names. But they're playing great golf. They're playing the best golf of their lives, and they're consistent. Also, one thing I wanted to note that Aaron Rai, Spencer, whom you have on your outright card, he's 8th this year in strokes gained total on the PGA Tour, including everybody. So, I mean, really 7th because Scotty Scheffler shouldn't count. But he's ahead of guys like Sahith Theegala, Wyndham Clark, Akshay Bhatia. You look at another golfer, Ryo Satsune, whom, sure, he doesn't have a top 10 finish this year. He's ahead of guys like Cameron Young and Matt Fitzpatrick at 51st in strokes gained total so far this season. So it's getting late on the season. A month from now, we'll have the FedEx Cup playoffs. So desperate times on the PGA Tour for a lot of these guys who, especially if they didn't play the US Open, the Memorial, or the Travelers in those signature events or in the major championship, got to get these points now to get into the playoffs, secure your card, secure your spots in the signature events next year. So it's important times for those guys, especially as the big guns are jumping across the pond. And Patrick Cantlay, as we noted earlier, hurt himself during a workout and had to withdraw yesterday. So that completely changed the board this week. Gentlemen, any other bets you wanted to workshop? Any other players you're looking to fade that you haven't gotten an opportunity to? Anything else you'd like to note?
No, I was just, as you were saying all of that, going back to the Valspar, just trying to figure out how Aaron Rai actually ended up being my one and done pick that week. But I mean, he only graded 10th in my model, and now he's first overall in my model. So just mistakes have been made. That's just where I'm at right now.
That was the week where I think I gave out Chandler Phillips plus 320 for a top 40, and that market has changed for him. I also wanted to note Matt Kuchar, somebody could be interesting to fade this week. He was on our feature group coverage last week. We had a Spanish feed, so we wanted to have Nico Echevarria on there, and he was paired with Kuchar, so I got to watch some Matt Kuchar. Kuchar's ball speed is nail-like at 163 on the PGA Tour, basically the lowest on tour. He was around 156 last week because he has a hurt left hip that was not really allowing him to walk perfectly. He was visibly in pain, or audibly in pain, I should say, as well, sounding like somebody who was at Wimbledon, with Wimbledon starting today, after every shot. He still made the cut and played decently, but 4 straight days of that, then playing again this week because he has to, because he's desperate for points. I don't know how long his body's going to be able to withstand all that. He also hits the ball nowhere. And with guys this week clubbing down and hitting fairways, some of them are going to hit their 3-woods farther than his driver. And I think his fairway advantage is going to disappear a little bit more with these fairways being relatively wide at 38 yards on average. So he could be somebody who's interesting to fade, even though he had a strong week last week. There's no data to show that he has that hurt hip, but the ball speed was around 156 when it's normally around 163. So he could be somebody who's interesting if you can find a market, maybe miscut equity or maybe a miscut market, or in a matchup with somebody whom you're bullish on. So I'd keep an eye on that. Nobody else really
back
comes
Will
to mind.
Gordon too.
Oh, that's right. I had that noted. Are we playing him for first round leader?
No, I don't think. Maybe first round DFL. His game's in a bad place. He was missing the cut on the Corn Ferry Tour. I don't even think he sniffed the number. But I love him. Will, if you're listening, then go get him this week, buddy.
One of the more interesting, I did bet Will Gordon last year for first round leader at Pebble Beach, and believe he was 8 under through 15 holes, and then the wind switched and was right into his face for the last couple holes, and he might have made a 10 on 18, and he ended up missing the cut. That was crazy. Shout out to Will Gordon. Hope he figures it out. Looking at his results this season, he played a few times until February and then didn't play between February and June. So I'm not sure whether I think he had partial status and maybe he was hurt. He didn't even play on Corn Ferry Tour until June. So he's played the last two of the last 3 weeks on the Corn Ferry, or 2 of the last 4 weeks on the Corn Ferry Tour, missed cuts in both of them, doesn't have a top 40 in 6 starts across both tours this year. It'll be interesting to see what he does this week. He could be a super deep DFS flyer. You might be the only person who owns him, but who knows? Gentlemen, want to get into some rapid fire and then we can call it a day?
Yes.
All right. So we noted at the top of the board, Sungjae Im. What do we make proper on him, Spencer?
I'm higher than the rest of the market. Like or higher as in worse than the rest of the market. Like I understand most books have them where they have them. Like I have them more in the 35-1 range. Like I'm double, triple where the market is.
Nick, any thoughts on Sungjae?
I think it's his tournament to lose, and I was going to start my card there. It's a good price. You can get 15-1 out there. I think that's incredibly fair, but didn't get there.
He's coming off of by far his best approach week of the year at the Travelers Championship. Best result as well, where he tied for 3rd there. So momentum for Sungjae Im, also top 10s at the Charles Schwab and the Memorial Tournament. I'm not super interested in playing him. I think there are other guys with higher upside, a la Davis Thompson. So that's why I've gone in a different direction. Sepp Straka, Spencer, you had him last year here. What do you make proper for him this week? He's 16.5-1, by the way.
I honestly think that number is very, very close. So I talked about Aaron Rye being 15.5-1, and this is where my model was just really aggressive on the top 3 that I had. So Poston was the big climber for me in that area when I just ran it for pure win equity. I have proper at 18.5-1 on Straka, so you're technically not getting a fair price, but I thought Straka was the 3rd best upside candidate in this tournament, and the market unfortunately has him as the 2nd name. So I couldn't get there with the number that we had, but Straka has a real chance to go back to back at this tournament.
He's been playing really consistently so far this year. I'm very intrigued by him. The whole psychology of is he going to go back to back has thrown me for a loop a little bit. So I'm still considering him, Poston, and Rye. I'll probably throw one of them on my card, but haven't quite made up my mind yet. Let's look a little farther down the board. Denny McCarthy is somebody whom we haven't discussed. He's at 22-1. Jason Day's 32-1. Spencer, or Nick, I'll sing this to you. If you had to bet between McCarthy at 22 or Day at 32, which one would you pick?
I would take Day at 32. Not a huge Denny guy, but I do think obviously if it's a putting contest like many are anticipating, I think it fits well for him. But Jason Day's got to show something eventually. But I don't know, maybe he's broken again. Sorry, Spencer, but for 10 points more, give me Jason Day.
Spencer, same question.
I'm going to say Denny McCarthy. I don't necessarily want to go down either one of these two routes. I do. My model does like McCarthy. It just doesn't like the price that you're having to pay for him. Where with Day, my model likes him less, and it also doesn't like the price that you have to pay. But there are some, and we can look at the course history from McCarthy. There are some really interesting high-end returns in my sheet that start rivaling him with some of the big name players of the top favorites. Like number 2 in my model in strokes gain total at TPC courses. You look at a 2-year running perspective, number 2 in my model in strokes gain total. There's real intrigue for why he finds success at this venue. And for somebody that never wants to play Denny McCarthy, and I never find myself on him, most of those putting heavy profiles are normally names that I don't back in a lot of spots. But when an option like McCarthy ends up becoming an intriguing name in my sheet, it kind of always at least raises some sort of a flag to where it at least makes me acknowledge where they are on it. Like I can't get there at the price, but I do like him for different iterations of the market. Probably a good matchup bet, like beyond anything else, if you could find the right opponent.
Interesting that Jason Day is in the field this week. He's 28th in the FedEx Cup standing, so it's not like he needs points. I think he's in Justin Thomas territory from last year. He hasn't played at the John Deere Classic since 2011. So I don't know why he's playing. Intrigued. Maybe he just really thinks this is a great spot for him to win. And the putter has been really hot. He's 9th in strokes gained putting this season, has been red hot there, but the iron play has not been consistent at all.
You guys, real quick, one last question. Do you guys like Ben Silverman at all? He graded very similar to Chandler Phillips for me.
I know I faded him last week, and that was an unmitigated disaster. Like my entire head-to-head card last week was some of the worst. And I don't even like with Silverman, at least I can stomach that one that Silverman played well and my model ended up being wrong. It was much less digestible for the Taylor Moore answer, where Taylor Moore lost a million strokes with his approach game and just kept gaining with the short game over and over again. After 2 rounds with Taylor Moore, he was projected 131st in my model and found his way just working up the leaderboard the whole week. So I thought Silverman looked good. My model didn't necessarily have him as high as yours did, Nick, but for a player for me that was outside of the top 100 last week, and as everybody knows, I run mine over long-term duration of time, and I just didn't think last week was a good course fit for him, and I kind of stand by that answer. So we've talked about this previously with Harman, where Harman overachieved at a course early in the year, and then you throw him on a course that's more suited for his game, and then all of a sudden you get like another top 10 finish from him. I think Silverman possesses a very similar profile there, where a guy that didn't fit in Detroit Golf Club and now all of a sudden gets here and is inside of the top 45 of my model. Not necessarily popping, but I think for some of these markets is an intriguing play.
4 of his 5 best putting weeks on the PGA Tour have been in the last 4 weeks as well. So surging with a lot of momentum. I think he fits the build of someone you want to back here who hits fairways, decent iron play, especially from short iron distances, and then strong putter with momentum.
Yeah.
All right, guys, I'll get you out of here on this one. Nick Dunlap is 37-1. Our boy Kevin Yu is 45-1. Luke Clanton is 45-1. Sam Stevens is 50-1, and Eric Cole is 50-1. If you had to take an outright ticket on one of those 5, Dunlap, Yu, Clanton, Stevens, or Cole, Nick, which one would you pick?
I don't, as much as I like Sam Stevens, I don't believe in him. Give me Clanton. I want to root for him. That'll be a rooting interest play. And because the unknown, I think, is why I'm more intrigued at that number than what I know about the other guys.
Yeah, I will give the same answer as Nick on that. For the most part, Kevin, you would probably be the second choice for me, and I have not given that answer in quite a little bit of time. You talked about this, Roberto, of Kevin Yu gaining heavily with the putter last year, and I think it's an interesting viewpoint when you look at this leaderboard from 2023. You get these really high-end performers, or at least marginally or better expected performers with the putter. And then you get a lot of the low end guys. Like Straka was a top 40 expected putter for me last year. Todd, Shank, Poston, Hubbard, McCarthy, all those names are your prototypical putters that excelled. But then you got a lot of names like Smalley and Glover and Kevin Yu and Grayson Sigg that are not necessarily producing with the flat stick. And I guess that kind of shows what I tried to do with my card, where I did grab the putter in JT Poston, but there's an ability for names that are not necessarily your week in, week out putters. Maybe Rio can be that option this week where they end up popping with that fashion of their game and they win the golf tournament. So that's the approach I took in the outright market. And as a last closing note, just because I found this very interesting, just to get back to the Davis Thompson conversation, when I was looking at Aaron Rye of why I took him at the Valspar, and I was going through one of my articles there, my best bet that week, which happened to also be a losing ticket, which, I mean, we want to talk about closing line value months later on this. Davis Thompson was an underdog in a matchup to Webb Simpson. Ended up losing that ticket. And that's how far Davis Thompson has come. And I think it shows how quickly these markets can change over the course of time with some of these young players. And with the young players, I'm always fine. And maybe that's just kind of gets us into the Clanton answer. I'm fine being ahead of the market on some of those options. These names where I know what they are, because we've seen it year after year after year, I'm less likely to want to react to a move or two. Like what I've seen from Clanton so far makes me intrigued to at least, I didn't punch the outright ticket, but I don't think that it's that bad of a wager. It's hard to imagine that two amateurs end up winning when it hasn't happened in forever with Dunlap and him in this season, but Clanton is the real deal.
Last amateur to win before Nick Dunlap earlier this season was 1991, Phil Mickelson. I'm sure you've heard of him. Also, coming into this year, Luke Ladden and Nick Dunlap were rivals. They're both juniors or sophomores or juniors. And no, they were both sophomores this past year, would have been rising juniors, or at least Clanton is. Clanton was considered the better golfer. And then Nick Dunlap just went out on the PGA Tour and won. This is a weaker field than the American Express earlier in the season. Perhaps it could be the week for Clanton. I don't think it's good of a course fit as the American Express was, where, of course, that's a rotational course or a rotation of courses. But a lot of drivers there, fewer drivers here. If it was more driver friendly, I'll be more inclined to go with those guys. But among those five golfers, I'd also go with Clanton, just barely above my boy, Kevin Yu. Nick?
Clanton, just really quickly, sorry, Clanton is in a matchup against Nick Dunlap out there where Clanton is minus 127. So you are correct, Roberto. Like Dunlap may take down a tournament and all of a sudden get all the notoriety, but even the market off of a US Open result that finished just outside of the top 40 for all the reasons that you talked about immediately reacted to him at the Rocket Mortgage last week and made him a favorite against everybody. And now you enter this week favored over Dunlap, who's already won, right there on the odds board with JT Poston, an essential minus 110 each way bet against Kevin Yu. Market is respecting him in all of these matchups. That's a very indicative return for a golfer that when you can get those answers from these up and coming guys, there's usually something there.
By the way, I'm still very bullish on Nick Dunlap. He has shown that he has a ton of upside. Obviously, he won this year. It's about him not making mistakes sometimes. I think he's got his best stuff is as good as just about anybody else's, not named Scheffler. It's just avoiding mistakes, being a little bit more disciplined. And he's still 20 years old. So he's got a long way to go. And it's cool to be able to watch him mature on the PGA Tour instead of having to wait a couple of years to earn his card. Fellas, had a lot of fun breaking this down this week. Nick, where can we find your work this week?
At Sticks Picks on Twitter, STIXPICKS, and the Action Network's Best Bet article with you boys.
Awesome. Spencer, where can we find your work this week?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at TOffSports. I will have my Wednesday article here for Action Network. Don't know what it's going to be about yet. It's probably going to be looking into the outright market because there are very few weeks that I come on the show and actually express interest in the outright market to the tune that I have this week. And maybe it's an over aggressive thing like Nick talked about, where I think we're all seeing the board really well. And sometimes it's just these minor little deviations that occur to where a player doesn't win or does win. Like Minwoo Lee last week had every chance to take, if he could just, he makes par on 18, he's in a playoff. If he makes birdie on 18, he wins the golf tournament sitting there in the clubhouse over the final couple holes. So I think we're very close to hitting an outright winner. I really like the outright board this week. I thought there was a lot of intriguing options to talk about. And then I'll have all my in-tournament bets, which try to get back on track this week. As I mentioned, last week was probably one of the low-end tournaments that has been put together for me this season, but very intrigued about this tournament. I think there's a lot of potential here for some nice upside results.
And hey, sometimes you have the right side. You bet Davis Thompson over Webb Simpson, and it just doesn't work out. So got to keep playing the game and sticking to the course. Pun intended. You can find me on Twitter at Roberto8213. You can find all of our Action Network content wherever you get it online on the app. We also have all of our podcasts. You can find it on YouTube as well. Shout out to the YouTubers. Tons of great content going on with Action. Going to get ready for the Olympics. We already have an Olympics article out there that Joshua Perry put out. He bet Tom Kim at 50-1 before Tom Kim nearly won 2 weeks ago at the Travelers. So be sure to check it out. We've got already Olympic basketball qualifier bets. I know Joe Dallaire is going nuts on those. But we got bets for Rookie of the Year, for NBA with all the free agency going on, tons of live reactions in real time. So be sure to check out the Action Network app or wherever you consume Action Network content. Our team is putting in a lot of work and I'm very proud to be a part of it. You can find me on Twitter at Roberto8213. Also, as a reminder, this podcast is presented by Bet365. Bet365 doesn't do ordinary, and that's why you get more boosts with them than with anyone else. Every day, they power up the odds on hundreds of bets to give you a chance to win more. Bet365 boosts specific markets, your winnings, and even parlays, and they don't stop there. Keep an eye out for their biggest and best odds with the incredible Super Boost. Check out the boost and see why it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 or older and present in Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, North Carolina, New Jersey, Ohio, Virginia, or 18 and older in Kentucky. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. Once again, you can follow the guys. Nick is at 6picks on X. Spencer is at T-Off Sports. Also want to give a big podcast to you, the listeners, for supporting us every week. Always value your time and your inputs. And big thank you to everyone who makes this podcast possible, especially our producers, David Payne and Matt Mitchell. And of course, our producer, Noah Niederhofer, who does the lion's share of the work, editing and getting us across the finish line with production every week. So big thanks to Noah. Big thanks to everybody out there. And we'll see you guys next week across the pond for the Scottish Open. Shout out to Jordan Smith.